Hello, everybody. This is Abby Mathews with Dabble. I'm here to give you an agent deep dive. Before we get started, though, we're going to give everybody a few minutes to start rolling in. B's excited and nervous both. B, you aren't on screen, so I think you don't have to be as nervous as me. I don't have Doug or Hank to be my wingmen today. I'm flying solo. So, and I'm a little worried about the tech. I did embed a few videos into my presentation and they have sound, and I'm really hoping that sound goes through. So, while we're waiting for everybody to get here, the late people to sort of roll in, let me see, remove X from the live stream. That doesn't seem to be working. There we go. Speaking of tech issues. So just a couple of things, actually really just one thing. If you guys have questions, put them in the chat. If you have a question now, feel free to put it in the chat now, even if you don't know if I'm going to cover it or not. That's totally fine. Put it in the chat and I'll make sure to cover it. If I've already got it in the presentation, I'll make sure we harp on it a little if I know somebody's really got a lot of questions about that area of agent research. I'm really excited to share this with you guys to the point where I actually took an agenting class this week with an agent on this very subject because I was afraid maybe there was something my presentation was missing. Maybe there was some new piece of information that I needed in order to give you guys like the most up-to-date agenting information. And the truth was my presentation goes actually a little deeper than hers did. So I was quite proud. The only thing that I think she was able to add was kind of her perspective as an agent and what she personally looks for when she digs through her slush pile. So it was definitely very interesting, but I'm going to give you guys pretty much the bulk of what she covered in the class. It's the theme that I'm going to cover here with you guys today. So I think we've given everybody enough time to sort of get here. Let me pull up my presenter window so I can work the slides. Anyway, let me give you a little bit of background about me. So I've written 6 finished manuscripts, 2 of which I sort of half-heartedly pitched. I didn't necessarily go whole hog on them because every time I wrote a book and started to pitch it, while you're pitching agents, one of the things they say you should do is keep working on your next book. That's what keeps you busy and keeps you from fretting and constantly refreshing your email. And so the next book that I wrote felt better than the one I was pitching. So I'd put the pitching one on pause and I'd finish that book and then I'd pitch it. And then as I was pitching the second book, I wrote a third, which felt better. So I put the second on pause. You guys can sort of see, my rhythm there. So I ended up pausing all my pitching until I felt like I had written, I think, the absolute most solid book that I could write. And that's really where we need to start is if you are going to seriously start pitching agents, you have to have a completed manuscript. You cannot, long gone are the days where you can have a chapter or 2 and an idea and pitch it to an agent and get picked up. So you do have to have a finished book once you start actually sending out your queries. So keep that in mind. B says everything gets better with time. So yes, that's true. I feel like we all age like a fine wine. And that's really the truth, you guys, is debut novels aren't necessarily a writer's first book. So keep that in mind. I consider my first 5 books my practice books. You probably don't have to write as many as I did, though. I am admittedly a slow learner. So, all right, so let's cover. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about how to find agents. Really, this is strategies for building your agent list. And by agent list, all I mean is simply a list of potential agents to query when you're ready. We're going to cover where you can find them. And finding them is kind of the easy part. It's figuring out if they're right for you, right, is the hard part. It's a little bit trickier because it involves some research. So we're going to talk about some general strategies for determining if an agent might be a good fit, because you really do just want to query agents who are a good fit for you. You do not want to just, machine gun spray your query out amongst every literary agent in America. It's too much. So, and then lastly, I'm going to show you how to keep track of the agents and all their info. So there's a couple different ways that you can do it, but at the end, I'll even share a spreadsheet that I've gone ahead and made for you guys. If you want to, jump in today and use my spreadsheet and start building your list, then that's great. So I'm going to warn you though, because it is going to be really easy to go down a rabbit hole. You're going to start telling yourself stories that this agent is your dream agent and they're so perfect for you. And this agent is the only person that's the right agent for me. And don't go down that emotional rabbit hole, you guys, because at the end of the day, the agent just needs to do one thing, and that's sell your book, right? And here's the thing. The truth is they can all do it. Like every one of them has the ability to sell your book. They all have different connections and experiences, yes, but none of that matters if they aren't a champion for your story. Okay, so right now, we're trying to find the right person for your story. And to do that, we have to decipher all the clues, so to speak, right? Because we are looking for a future business partner based on the online equivalent of a Tinder profile, right? So now luckily I never had to go down that Tinder rabbit hole myself. But I want you to imagine an online dating profile and you're trying to figure out, is this a person I actually want to go on a date with? In case of an agent, it's more like, is this somebody that I actually want to marry? Because you are looking for someone that you are going to have a business relationship with. All right. So I want you to also keep in mind that pitching is a numbers game. Now, if you were in James Wade's workshop, I believe he said the same thing, that pitching is a numbers game. Look, writers love their agents, all right? But the truth is the agent does not have to be your new BFF. They have to be somebody you can work with, and they have to be able to sell your book, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to find enough of those people that fit the bill that hopefully, if you have a list of 100 agents, one of them is going to look at your story and go, yes, I want that. Okay. Because if you only have a list of 10 agents and you think agent number 1 on your list is perfect and agent number 1 rejects you, you need the numbers, because that's really going to be what helps you find the agent. I also want to tell you that this is the time when we need to start managing our emotions. Okay, so to be brutally honest, you are headed into the part of the writing process where you may or may not have faced rejection before, and you might be facing it for the first time. All right, so when you get a rejection from an agent, I want you to know that it does not mean that your story sucks and I suck and everyone hates me and I should give up. Okay, you have worked really hard to get here. So please do not tell yourself crazy stories like that. What you need is data to know what is wrong. Okay. Are you pitching the wrong people? Is your query not reflective of the book? Is it your query that's not catchy enough? Do you need to rework your first 10 pages? Have you gotten enough feedback to be able to interpret those rejections? Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit, but we could actually do an entire workshop just on interpreting rejections. It's actually kind of fascinating. But what is the worst case scenario that could happen to you right now? All right. Listen, people, the worst case scenario is just that your book isn't ready to pitch. All right. That is fixable. All right. Just know the answer to everything is often just more time. Okay. More time querying, more time doing a deeper research of agents, more time rewriting your query, more time revisiting your first pages, more time doing another revision on your book. All right. You might even be asked for an R&R. So if you've never heard of an R&R before, it's called a revise and a resubmit. So oftentimes, if an agent likes your writing style, sees promise in your book, but they can't really take you on unless the book is finished, right? They might give you some suggestions. And they can say to you, if you are willing to revise your book based on my suggestions, I would be willing to read it again and reconsider you. That can be a dangerous thing for some writers, because if the agent is making suggestions that you don't feel fit your story, they might not be the right agent for you. But I have a girlfriend, Mindy, who actually ended up, she had queried close to 100 agents when she ended up with 3 requests for an R&R, and all 3 requests had the same piece of feedback. They all wanted her to revise and do the exact same thing. And that was her clue that that truly was like something broken in her manuscript. I mean, unfortunately, it took her almost 100 agents to find 3 that would tell her what to do. But she did it, and her top agent out of those 3 actually immediately snatched her up. So sometimes there are success stories with an R&R. All right. But basically, sometimes walking away from the writing part of the process and moving on to pitching is what gives you that distance you need to be able to sort of objectively look at what's working and what's not working in your manuscript. And you should be able to get some feedback during this process that will help you figure out what to do next. Okay, so now that you've had my little pep talk, let's get into the meat of today's workshop. So when is a good time to start researching agents? Like, at what part in the writing process do you need to start researching agents? And I really can tell you anytime. The caveat is, as long as it does not become a procrastination technique, okay? You know what I mean. When you're doing something writing adjacent and you decide to call that writing, like, fair warning, this can be addictive, and it can also be a total time suck. So proceed with caution, but I don't think it's a bad idea to do, even if you're outlining a book or even if you're writing your first draft, because what you're going to do is you're going to start seeing what are the types of things that agents are asking for today. And if you happen to be writing that, then that's amazing. Unlike indie published people, traditionally published people tend not to write to the market because it's such a slow process. By the time you go from finishing a book, finding an agent, the agent has the book out on submission, it gets bought by the publishing house, you go through another round of edits, the book gets announced, it can be years, and the market's changed 17 times since then. So anyway, I would also argue, speaking of indie authors, though, that indie authors research agents. Why? Because it's market research. What are the trends that you're seeing agents ask for within the genre? So those trends might be more helpful to you than they necessarily are to a person who wants to be traditionally published, who is still in the early book writing process, because indie publishing, they can turn a book around a little bit faster. So how are agents talking about these books? Are the books selling? A big part of being a writer is just knowing the marketplace and understanding how books are bought and sold. So be nosy. What are the agents asking for? And is it your thing? Like right now, I can tell you guys the book that I'm querying, it's middle grade fiction. It's sort of a low fantasy. I call it sort of a Southern folklore sort of story. It's fun, it's funny, but almost every single freaking agent that I find, they want MG horror. And I'm like, what? If I were indie publishing, I would be all over that because I know that must be hot in the market right now. So that leads us to the first piece of information that you are going to need to go to get started with this process. All right. So number one, you really need to know your genre. So before you start researching agents, all right, what is your genre? So why do you need to know this? All right. I've worked with so many writers over the years who are like, I don't know what my genre is. Or maybe they started off thinking their genre was one thing. And by the time they finished the book, they realized they had written something totally different. In a way that sort of happened to me. I have always written low fantasy, which is high fantasy is more like dragons and elves and, made up languages and like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Those sort of things are high fantasy, but low fantasy is more like the world is recognizable as the world in which we now live. There's just this like magical thread woven through it. So that tends to be like where I'm most comfortable. But it wasn't until after I had written like 3 books that I looked back and went, oh, I actually also write action adventure. And that was sort of a game changer for me, recognizing that in my own work. So you really need to know what your genre is. And if I say this once, you guys, I'm going to say it 1,000 times. We are moving into the phase where your book is a business. All right. And that's really hard for some people to sort of make that transition. Okay. But an agent has to know how to sell your book. And just like writers, agents like certain types of books over others. So, I mean, honestly, I love fantasy. I write fantasy, but you're going to be hard pressed to get me to pick up a high fantasy book with dragons in it or names that I can't pronounce any of the characters, right? I know I'm not a high fantasy girl, but my daughter, on the other hand, she adores high fantasy. All right. So you can't just know your genre in general. Like you have to really dig deep into your genre and know what books sit on the shelf next to yours. Okay. Agents want to know that because that's how they know if they can sell your book or not. So when I went to this agent class over the week, earlier in the week, one of the things she said that was super interesting to me was she had previously really been big on kid lit, and she used to take a lot of writers who write middle grade. Now she's kind of moving into the adult world, and she was only looking for middle grade horror writers. So again, here's the middle grade horror cropping up on me. Right. But she actually talked about that during the class. And she said, I specify middle grade horror because out of all the middle grade writers that I have accumulated over the years, I do best selling the horror books. I have not done very well selling middle grade fantasy, middle grade sci-fi, or any sort of contemporary middle grade. So to me, I was like, oh, that kind of like ding, a little light bulb went off in my head. That's the other reason they get really, really specific is because those are their contacts in the literary world. So that's why you've really got to research hard. And if they say they're looking for middle grade horror and you just have, a middle grade book in general, you're probably going to get a rejection, even if your book is good, not because the book is terrible, but because they can't sell that book. All right. So along that same line, you got to know your comps. All right. Your comparative titles. Now, let me tell you guys, I love comps. I could literally talk about comps all day long. All right. Knowing your genre is one thing, knowing your comps is another. All right. They want you to have recent comps, all right, for your query letter, which is some agents say within the last 3 years, some say within the last 5 years. Doesn't matter. You can actually use movies and TV shows as your comps, but like not all of them. All right. So you need to have at least one really good recent book in your section with the comp titles. All right. But searching for agents with any comp title is going to help you. For example, the book that I am currently querying, my comp titles that I used while I was writing it, these were comps that I gave myself. I set out to write a book that was like Charlotte's Web meets Mary Norton's The Borrowers meets The Dukes of Hazzard. Okay, none of those are recent. One of those is a television show. All right. But why that's important is because I can go to some of these websites that I'm about to show you, and I can actually search the words Charlotte's Web, and I can come up with any agent who says, like, I'm looking for the next Charlotte's Web. And right there, I know, even though Charlotte's Web was published in 1952 and not recent by any stretch of the imagination, that agent is looking for the next one of those. My book fits that. Okay. There are a lot of parallels between the books. I think that will hold true. Now, you will find that oftentimes agents will tell you their favorite movies, their favorite television shows. These are all clues for you, okay? Maybe an agent likes Ted Lasso and you're writing a story with a classic underdog, right? You're going to make a note of that on your list. You're looking for clues everywhere that your book may be their jam, okay? So lastly, we need to know where to look. All right. I keep saying I have all these websites. I'm about to show them to you because there are a lot of different places on the web that you can find this information. Okay. We're going to dig into some of those resources, which include, all right, manuscript wish list. Actually, the one that I did not put on this list, but I'm going to say really quickly because I did do a video that I put in the community for Dabble that showed you where I took, actually, I have the book sitting right here. This was a loose comp for one of my stories, and I went into the back of the acknowledgments section right here. And in the first line, they had who their agent was. So I know right away that this agent reps low fantasy. All right. So that is one way that you can find an agent to start digging on, right? But you can also go to manuscript wish list. Manuscript wish list. It's on Twitter. It's a hashtag on Twitter or X. But a lot of agents have moved over to Blue Sky, so you can find this information there. Then there's also Query Manager and Query Tracker. So if you have never heard of these sites, they're sort of like sister sites. Query Manager is what the agents use. They can sometimes, instead of sending them an email with your query, they will give you a link to a Query Manager form and you fill out the form. Query Tracker is the author version of that, where you can track your queries. You can keep your list of agents to be queried, but you can also look at stats on agents and search for agents. So there's a lot of really good information on there, and I'm going to show you that. And then also we have agency websites, which is pretty self-explanatory. And the last one that I'm really going to show you is Publishers Marketplace. So I did put on these. Some of these are free. Some of these have paid versions to them. And so it just depends. Publishers Marketplace is actually, I think, a little on the expensive side. Query Tracker is like super, super reasonable. I want to say it was like $20 for the whole year or something. So depending on what your budget is, if you want to pay for anything, and really where you are in the process. So I tend to, when I'm querying, I will renew my subscription to Publishers Marketplace. And when I'm not querying, I don't pay for it. And so, think about things like that, right? But where are we going to start? All right, manuscript wish list. So let's start here on this website. By the way, I usually cross-reference any agent that I find on multiple platforms, because sometimes they post the same information everywhere, but sometimes you find more information on one platform versus another. So I'm going to just pick this one to sort of start with, and we'll go from there. So notice here it says find agents and editors. So if you're looking for agents, there may be editors on here who work for small presses who will take you without an agent, but there are also editors on here who are on here because agents also use this website in order to find traditional publishing editors to pitch. So that can be a little tricky, but you are on here just looking for agents, okay? If you find somebody who has a profile that says editor, it is not a developmental editor that you can hire independently to like look at your book. They are literally editors for the traditional presses, and they want agents to pitch them, not authors, okay? So keep that in mind. All right, and here's just to kind of show you that. You can see here's Abby Mueller, and you can see down here, I've circled it. She is an editor, so that's where you'll see it. And then we have Abby Saul, who, if you look over here, I've circled it with a heart. She is an agent. So you can see they both have what they're looking for from a book, but one you can pitch and the other you cannot. So script wish list search page. Can you guys hear that? Let me pause it. Can you guys put in the chat? Could you hear when the video went off? I just want to make sure before I play it for 3 minutes or however long it is that you guys can hear what it says. Okay, good. You guys can hear it. So let me play this because I actually went through the process to show you somebody that I found and how I sort of looked at it. Oh, let's see if I can figure out how to make it play again. Let's find out. Oh my gosh, you guys. Did I break the presentation? Script wish list search page. And just for brevity's sake, because you guys can obviously do all of this on your own, I have gone ahead and filled out what I'm looking for. So for me, it's middle grade. I'm looking for any type of agent. Now, keep in mind, I personally don't care if it's junior agent, an associate literary agent, an assistant literary agent, or a full agent. As a matter of fact, I would almost prefer one of these because if they are building their list, they may be actively looking for writers to sign. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click all of these. Right. I also came down here to fiction genres. I clicked the ones that matched my book. Remember, I said you have to know what your genre is, right? Obviously, it's nothing nonfiction. And I said search. So when I searched it, let's see what comes up. Here we go. It's going to be in alphabetical order. So these are all the agents who take one of the things on my list. So if you can look, it's mostly middle grade, middle grade, middle grade, middle grade. All of these people take middle grade work. Now, that does not mean that I should pepper every one of these agents with my query, because just because they take middle grade and just because they take action adventure or fantasy does not actually mean they're a good fit for my work. So what you're going to have to do is start clicking and looking at each one of these individually and seeing if the things that they like are things that you like, the things that you write are things that they're looking for. And sometimes that can be very, very difficult. So we're going to take one person, we're going to click on her, and I'm going to sort of walk you through it. Okay, so here's the person that I found. Now that you kind of see how to use the search bars, I found this lady, Catherine Ross, and she's, this is her whole manuscript wish list, or at least what I could screenshot. And what I wanted to show you was right here. So she does take horror, fantasy, and mystery. Okay, so this was great. Also, she takes stories set in the South. Now, remember, I told you I had a little bit of a Southern folklore bend to my story. So it takes place on a farm in a fictional town in Georgia. So my story is set in the South. Also, she says isolated, contained settings like islands, camps, boarding schools. Mine takes place 100% all on the same farm. So I thought, okay, I fit a lot of what it is that she's looking for. So she also wants supernatural folklore. Now she does say specifically Caribbean folklore, all right? But I do have, my whole thing is steeped in folklore. It's more European folklore because they're really sort of based on the mischievous brownies in like, England and Scotland. You see folklore with the brownies. And that's kind of what I had focused on when I wrote it. But she also says cozy contemporary fantasies, okay, that show the magic among the mundane. So right there, as I'm reading through her list, I'm like, wow, I think I hit it. I think I hit it. I think I hit it. So I was really excited to find her, right? So, but then I started looking at I'd like the next. So under MG, so you can see she's got root magic. So I looked up that book, and it's an African American folk magic story. It's a very different vibe from mine. Okay. She likes Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. That's MG horror. Mine is not horror, right? Armani and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston, right? That was described as MG fantasy, hashtag Black Girl Magic. That's how I found that one described on, I don't know if it was Amazon or where it was, right? So I'm looking at that. I'm like, wow, that's pretty different. Well, then I look at all the subgenres that she likes. Okay. And then I start looking at the TV and the movies that she likes. So she's got, I'm kind of backing up here. She's got a vibe. All right. I do write a different twist on some of these stories, but it's from my own personal cultural background, right? My family were sharecroppers in North Carolina, and my book takes place on a farm in the South. I also live on a farm in the South right now. And the folklore that my stories are generally steeped in, right, are European folklores. But she's definitely got a vibe. All right. So and this confirms the vibe right here. So anyway, is Catherine Ross a good fit? All right. So with 10 being the best fit ever and 1 being cold day in hell, I'm going to give you guys just a minute. I want you guys to figure out, do you think Catherine is a good fit for me? And then I'll tell you kind of how I rated her. So put it in the chat. So B says 3. Stacy says 3. Let's see. Kind of give everybody another second. Maybe you don't want to guess. Maybe you don't want to hurt my feelings. You can definitely say 1. That's fine. Brittany says 5. All right. 4. All right. Let me show you guys 4. Man, okay, you guys are a little harder than me. I said 6. Maybe 6 out of 10. Okay. Her vibe is darker than mine, right? So Outer Banks has like murder in it, right? I think like my kids watch it. I don't watch that one. The MG Small Spaces book was described as like a creepy adventure. Her tastes kind of lend towards horror and darker fantasy. She's also got like vampires and zombies and the Mothman, if you kind of look at some of the things that she's got on her list. I don't think she would discount my story, but it's definitely a little too sunny from the drawing of the mischievous like folklore brownies. I would say my work fits her requirements more or less, but it's sort of vibe adjacent. Am I going to query her? So, okay, spoiler. So I did. But if you're making a list, like what I would probably do is put her on a second tier, right? So I've heard a lot of people, and I sort of do this. I have different tabs in my spreadsheet, but I have heard some people say that they do like a 3-tier list. So you have tier 1, which are the agents that are like the best fits. So I would say maybe somebody who is like an 8, a 9, or a 10 on your list. So you kind of put those in that top tier. Then you have people who are like, kind of like Catherine, who they take what you write. Maybe you're sort of vibe adjacent, right? But it would not be outside of their realm to consider something that's your book. All right. So maybe put those in tier 2. Tier 3 would be like, all I can find about this person is that they take middle grade, but I can't really find a lot of information that's like deeper as to what exactly they're looking for. Like I might put them in a 3rd tier, right? So it's kind of like a good, better, best sort of ranking. Okay. So let's see if we can find a better fit. So I've got one that's a little bit more straightforward here to share with you guys. So I've got Breanne Johnson. So here's what I did. I Googled a list of best MG agents 2025, right? Or something along those lines. And on that list, I found this lady, Breanne Johnson. Okay. So Publishers Marketplace is one of the resources that I gave you guys. So here it is right here, Publishers Marketplace. And you saw manuscript wishlist previously, but let me kind of walk you through how to use Publishers Marketplace for research. Okay, so here I am looking at, I blew up so you could maybe see it a little bit better, what she's looking for in middle grade. And I noted that pretty much everything described my writing. So what you guys don't know about any of my books, but my whole body of work, I have one editor who has read pretty much everything. And she told me that oftentimes mine sounds a lot like Roald Dahl. That's kind of what my work reminds her of, right? So if you kind of look, I started to, it says she's got dark, crass, wacky, hilarious, which definitely describes wacky, hilarious would kind of be in my wheelhouse, maybe not so much crass, although I might have a fart joke in there, maybe. Roald Dahl's bizarre, flights of fancy. It's lower fantasy in general. She also says she wants historical MG that's fun and exciting. And while I did not explicitly state this in my manuscript, it does take place in my mind in the 1980s. So all the references I make, the songs that are on the radio that plays on the back porch of the farmhouse, all of those references I make are sort of these like 1980s references. And it definitely feels like, especially since every character in my story also has an equivalent from the Dukes of Hazzard. It definitely has a very Dukes of Hazzard-esque feel to it. It's a nostalgic vibe. That's what I was really, really going for. Something that would kind of maybe hit the parents in the feels when they were reading it out loud. So if you look here, I started making a list right here. She wants it fun and thoughtful and not sad. Okay. So the one link I have throughout the many genres I'm interested in is humor. Doesn't necessarily have to be silly humor. Sometimes it's more interesting to find humor in darker settings. I do love a story that can illuminate something about humanity and make me laugh. Life is serious enough. Reading should be a joy. That's exactly what I say about every book I pick up. I will not read stuff that is serious because life is serious enough and I read to escape. That's also why I love humor in my book, is because to me, humor is a big kind of escape for me. And my book does have this one sort of dark element in it, in that one of the the antagonist of the book, although you don't really figure that out until closer to the end, because there is a little mystery twist that happens in my story. But one of the things is the farm is failing, and because all the crops are rotting on the vines in the field, they are going to have to sell their ginormous farm pig in order to make ends meet. And when you sell a pig, you know what happens. So what the boys in the story are trying to do is save the pig, not realizing that he's actually sort of the antagonist in the whole thing. So the book is all about having good intentions and wanting to be seen for those good intentions, even if you royally screw up, right? So that's kind of what I did, and it really fits everything that she's got going on here. So I continued down the publisher's marketplace path, and I started looking at all of her forthcoming books and her recent sales. All right, so let me show you what I found here. Oh my gosh, it is so tiny on my screen. I'm going to have to really look close. I should have worn my cheaters for this. So here she's got The League of Beastly Dreadfuls, book 1. And when I started reading about the League of Beastly Dreadfuls, which I, by the way, had to go to all the websites, Amazon, the publishers' websites, to see the descriptions of these books. So I'm really having to dig up and do a lot of research here. I see that it says she's got this whole part Roald Dahl, quirky, smart, hilarious storytelling. It's like Lemony Snicket's series of unfortunate events. Lemony Snicket has always been one of my go-to comps for voice. I love his narrator's voice. I love basically everything about Lemony Snicket. So here again, we've got and I'm only highlighting, by the way, the MG books on the list. I'm not really looking at her YA or her picture books, although that can also be a clue. But the next YA book on the list was The Only Thing Worse Than Witches. And it was Roald Dahl meets Ava Ibbotson in this hilarious middle grade debut, perfect for reading out loud. So it has these Dahl-esque vibes to it, right? So then here's another one, Addison Cookie and the Treasure of the Incas. So this funny action-filled series is perfect for adventure-loving fans of Indiana Jones and James Patterson, the treasure hunters. So again, she's got this 1980s like television film movie comp, right? And it's full of laugh out loud moments, danger, excitement, nonstop action. So again, mine is also action adventure. I'm like, wow. That's actually a great comp. And I want you guys who are really nervous about comps to start seeing what I mean by comps. Now, I just told you my book was like Charlotte's Web meets the Dukes of Hazzard, right? And it's this low fantasy, funny action adventure story. But here you have another compared to an old movie, Indiana Jones, action adventure that's also laugh out loud funny. You can see what I mean by like the vibes are very similar here. All right, let's look at another one. The Incredible Space Raiders from Space, right? I'm not going to lie to you guys. I was drinking an orange Gatorade when I was researching this, and it came out my nose because I snorted when I read that title. That title sounded like something that I would write, okay? So already I'm like, dang, if I were an agent, I am 100% sure that these are the books that I would choose. So now my question to you is Breanne Johnson a good fit? All right, so I'm going to give you a minute out of 10 points on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best, 1 being cold day in hell. Rate Breanne Johnson. Do you think she's a good fit for me? So I'll give you kind of a minute to decide. Kristen gives her a 10, like immediately. Brittany, a 9. B, a 10. Jasmine, a 10. All right. Well, I'm not gonna keep you guys in suspense. I gave her a 9. Now, why did I withhold a star? Okay. I withheld a star. This is so stupid, probably, you guys. Because she's an established agent, and it will most likely be more difficult for me to get my work in front of her. So for self-preservation and to keep myself from getting uber hopeful, I'm ranking her a 10 out of 10. So will I query her? Spoiler, I have queried her and I am still waiting. I'm actually still waiting on the query from both Catherine Ross and Brianne Johnson to come back. I just queried them on February 12th and today is February 28th. So anyway, there we go. So where else can we look? We've checked manuscript wish list. I've showed you how to go to Publishers Marketplace and use their list of recently sold books in order to sort of like figure out what their vibe is. So let's talk about agency websites, right? So I rarely pitch someone without having first checked their agency website to see if there is a better candidate for my book. All right. Why not pitch two people at the same agency at the same time? Well, two reasons. One, most agencies have a policy that you can only pitch one of their agents at a time. And actually, I don't know that I have ever encountered an agency that does not have this policy. All right. So where do you find this information? You find it on their submissions page. Okay. So here is one for Diesel, Goodrich, and Beret. And underneath their submission guidelines under dues, it's the very first thing. Do be sure to query only one agent at this agency at a time. We will not review queries sent to more than one of us at a time. After an agent passes, you may query another agent at DG and B. All right. Now, I want you guys to know, don't think things like, well, how do they know I've queried two of their agents? They know. All right. They have the programs on the back that are sorting their queries. If you are querying them in Query Manager, actually Query Manager tracks how many times you've queried an agent and at that agency, how many times you've queried. So all this information is readily available for them. So make sure you check their submissions page, because if you query two of their agents when they tell you you cannot, that will immediately get you disqualified. All right. That's one of the really fun things about pitching is you have to follow every rule, which is so hard for some of us that have art degrees to follow the rules, but you have to, because otherwise they will ditch your query in a heartbeat. Okay. So two, the second reason you need to check this is some agencies share submissions and they consider a no from one a no from all. All right. So sometimes you only get one shot. All right. And you have to do your best to choose the right agent at that agency first. Right. This is going to be clearly stated on their submissions page. Right. So let me show you. You got to make a note of it on your spreadsheet. So this is PS Literary Agency. And you can see right here, please do not query multiple agents at the agency simultaneously. If you don't receive a request for further material within 4 to 6 weeks, it means a no from the agency. Okay. All right. So now that you sort of have that in mind, oh, here's another one. This is why you have to read everything super carefully, by the way. Andrea Brown Literary Agency. All right. So they tell you to only send your bios and pages to one agent at the agency, just one. And if that agent passes, they have a collaborative approach to agenting. They share queries internally, but you can send it to a second chance inbox. All right, where every agent can go through the second chance inbox. All right, so they all have different rules. You have to read the fine print. All right, but because of things like this, if you are going to query someone at an agency that works like this, you need to make sure you are querying the best person. Okay, so let's say that I find Jennifer Loughran is a great agent. She looks like she's a good fit for me. Okay. And I go to Andrea Brown and I see she's closed. So you guys can see the yellow circle underneath the curly haired blonde lady kind of in the center with glasses. That's Jennifer. She is closed to queries. But Jennifer next to her, also senior agent, she's open to queries, right? So I might be tempted to just query the person who's open, but you want to make sure that you're putting your query in front of the right person. And if Jennifer is a better fit, Jennifer L is a better fit than Jennifer R, right? Then you might want to wait for Jennifer L to open back up. All right. So these are all little details to keep track of on your spreadsheet. All right. So, okay. I've shown you manuscript wish list. I've shown you publishers marketplace. I've shown you the agency websites. Oh, which, by the way, the one piece that I didn't show you, but you can all do is, do you see underneath it says read more? If you click on that, every agent will have basically their bio, and in their bio, they'll tell you exactly what it is that they're looking for. Now, I find that sometimes you get better information on manuscript wish list. Sometimes they just put kind of a nice basic general piece here and then a bigger list on manuscript wish list. Sometimes it's the same information both, but if you read each of their bios, that's going to give you the information you're looking for. So, all right, I also want to show you Query Tracker, and I did embed a video here, and I think I've got it turned up, so I hope you can hear it. Let's see. Okay, really quickly, I'm going to show you around Query Tracker. So Query Tracker is a website where if you have queried an agent through Query Manager, you're actually going to be able to see where your query is in their kind of slush pile, so to speak. But you can also use it as a way to find agents and to organize and track your queries. Now, I don't personally use it to organize and track my queries. I use an Excel spreadsheet for that. But I do use it to find literary agents and spy on queries that I have already put in an agent's slush pile. So let me start you off first by saying this is Query Tracker. And what I wanted to show you were two things. So basically, first, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the Query Tracker website here, you will see agent information. Now, the reason why I oftentimes, the first thing I do when I sign into Query Tracker is scroll down to the bottom, because you will see right here, it says most recent additions to our database. Now, I personally am always on the lookout for a brand new agent who is looking to build their list. Now, this does not mean necessarily that the person is a brand new agent who is listed here. It just means they have added themselves to the Query Tracker database. But I think it's a pretty good place to start because you know this agent has actively added themselves to a query tracking database, one, but two, I like to bet that maybe they're new to the industry. So let's look at this first one here. So we have Ellen Scott of David Black Literary Agency. Okay, so what I want to show you is it will give me kind of some stats on her, some rundown. So query methods, she accepts queries via email. So she does not accept queries via Query Tracker. But it does give you some of her information. You can find this agent at, and these are all the different websites where you can click and find the agent. And it will also give her email and the website for the agency. So what I like to do first off always is go to the agency itself and find the agent. So our team, I'm going to go down to Ellen Scott. That was her name. And if you look, she is very young. It says she's the operations manager, but she's seeking out proposals. All right. So she must be a young junior agent as well as hold the job of operations manager. If you look, it says that she's interested in faith-based nonfiction, biblical essays. I don't even know what this word is. Christian culture, yada, yada, yada. She's closed from queries from March 1st to May 1st. If you queried her before March 1st, please expect a response by the end of April. So she's got kind of her timeline here. But I am looking to see what else she reps. Oh, right here. Be sure to query if you're reimagining or emulating a Greek myth or tragedy in your plot and or characters. Ellen does not represent high fantasy, sci-fi, horror, thriller, middle grade, or children. So I know for me, she is not a good fit, and I'm not going to put her on my list. So let's go back to this particular agent information down here. And another one is Danielle Marshall of Jane Roston Agency. So I'm going to do the same thing for her. I'm going to click here. I'm going to say, actually, it's probably under agents. So team agents. I'm going to look down until I find her. Danielle Marshall. All right. And it says she's looking for fresh voices in women's fiction, literary fiction, book club fiction, contemporary fiction, historical romance, mystery, and suspense, as well as memoir and selected self-help nonfiction. So again, she doesn't mention middle grade. So for me, she's not a good fit. Now, I've shown you kind of how I start tracking these people down. There's two things that you can do. If this agent is a good fit for you, indeed, I would recommend going back to Query Tracker and now clicking on some of the rest of these. Publishers Marketplace. Oh, this is a members only feature and I'm not signed in. So I will go back here and just go to Google. So that's going to take you back to the agent website. But if you look, you might be able to find, here's her LinkedIn. Jane Freeman did an article updated February 16th of 2025. Now, again, this is a premium article to paid subscribers of Jane's newsletter. So sometimes you do end up on dead ends. But I would go through and start clicking around at the other places where you can find this agent and see if you can find an interview, if you can find somewhere where they've given their manuscript wish list. Start tracking down within your genre. Is this a good agent for you? Now, that said, there's two other things to say. So if we go back here, let's just take Ellen Scott, for instance. She was not a good match for me, but we have not checked the rest of the team. So you can see there are a lot of other agents here on the team that I can now start clicking on individually and seeing, is this person someone who reps my genre and who is looking for a book that I have written, okay, or a book like one that I have written. So that's how you can kind of start using Query Tracker. And I cut off because there was a second part on how to use Query Tracker. Okay, the second thing I wanted to show you about Query Tracker is that you can actually search, just like on manuscript wish list, by agents and what they represent. So when you click on agents, you have to make sure you have my full agent list right here clicked, but you can say search by genre. So my genre is fiction. And if you scroll down, it's middle grade. So actually I've gone ahead because there was a drop down box here for middle grade. My book is action adventure. It's low fantasy. There's a lot of humor. And this particular book has an element of mystery in it. So I went ahead and clicked all those subcategories and said, okay, which then gave me this agent list. So now I have another place to go through and start searching for agents. Now, keep in mind, you can generally only query one agent at an agency at any given time. So this tells me right here, if you take a look, so I right now have it sorted by agency name. So everyone like at Avitas here comes up all at the same time. And I can see that at Avitas, only one agent who takes middle grade is currently open to querying. So that is probably where I would start, is with her. Now, remember, once you go there, so I'll go ahead and head here and let's see, we have to see what was her name was Penny. So I would say agents and team. And I am going to look for Penny. So I see Bridget, Jen, Aaron, Penny, looking for a Penny. Here she is, Penny Moore, senior agent. Okay, so now I have a spot to start looking. But remember, you have to check a couple of things. One, is it a one shot and you're done at this agency? If so, make sure Penny is definitely your best fit before querying. Two, do check the other agents. The other agents might tell you that they open and close at a certain time. So if another one is actually a better fit for you than Penny, then maybe wait for them to open and query them first. But this is another really good way to sort of be able to sort out any agents that you might decide that you want to. Okay, I'm like the queen of cutting myself off, I guess, making a video. But all right, so now that you guys have kind of seen the strategies for digging around, finding the information, we have to try and keep track of everything. Okay, so let me show you guys. I use an Excel spreadsheet. This is a picture of the one that I made for you guys, and I'll show you mine here in just a second. My preference for this is always Google Sheets, and I will tell you why. You can update it from anywhere, your phone, your computer, your tablet, if you're at work, if you're at home, if you're, in school pickup line, it doesn't matter. If you get a rejection, you can immediately record it because you really want to stay on top of making sure that your spreadsheet is up to date when you're actually sending out the queries. When I query, I also color code mine, which I'll show you in a minute. But first, what information do you need to keep on here? And really, that's a personal preference, all right? But here's where I start, all right? I've got the agent name and the agency name, and then I always keep their website or the link to the agent's query manager. I keep it readily available, particularly if I am not querying them right now and I want to query them later. If I simply record that information when I find it, it makes it super snappy for me to just, okay, I think I'm ready to query this person. Let me see if she's open. Click, and you're there. Okay, so I do keep their website information. I also try and keep track if you query them via email or query manager. So I like to know that because then I know how to follow up. I know if I'm looking in my inbox, I know if I'm looking in Query Tracker. If it's in Query Tracker, I know I can see where I am in their slush pile. I think that's helpful information to have. And I can also double check my boomerang. So we have a lot of querying tips that I can drop on you guys as we get a little farther in the querying process. But I also keep personalization in here. So I try and put why I think that agent is a good fit. I make a note of that. So you may or may not decide that you want to personalize your queries. That's going to be your preference. But if you do decide to personalize them, you're going to want to remember what drew you to that agent in the first place. So I would keep track of that. And then I always have a list for what date you're queried, what date you query them, and what date they responded. So that's just kind of information for me to have later if I decide to query a second book and maybe somebody took 6 months to get back to me, or if somebody never got back to me and they ghosted me, I try and keep track of that because I may not query them a second time. And then lastly, I do put a little notes section. So just for things like they're currently closed, but will reopen April 1st, 2025. I try and keep that information all in one handy dandy spot. Well, I guess it didn't take this was supposed to have a screenshot of my querying spreadsheet, which included a bunch of tabs. So when I actually keep mine together, I have a tab for agents who are closed. I have a tab for agents who are sort of my plan B agents. And then I have one tab for everybody that I would like to either query or have queried. They're sort of like my top tier are all on the first tab. Anyway, Oh, and I color code it too. So not that you can see it, but I color code. Red means they've rejected me. Green means the query is out there. And purple means they have my manuscript. So anyway, why is keeping track of all this important? It's really all about being professional. So that's what a lot of querying comes down to, is just being professional. You follow the rules. If an agent says, query one agent at a time, do it. And if they say, that agent says, no, don't query us again, then don't query them again. Don't query the same agent with the same project is another one of the rules. Unless you've done major revisions on it, once an agent tells you no on a book, you shouldn't send it back to them. And they know, they can see your email in their inbox. So it's just, they don't deem it professional. And so this is you sort of presenting yourself as professionally as possible. And so you want to make sure you keep track of who you've queried, so you don't query them again, even by accident. Okay. And also, I'd like to say this: it's absolutely okay to query in batches. In fact, it's sort of assumed that you're querying multiple agents at once. We can talk about exclusives for a hot second. I think I've only ever come across one agent who says that she wants to only take exclusive queries, which means you send it to her and she tells you, her timeline is you will hear back from her within 6 weeks. And so for 6 weeks, she is the only agent until you hear a no from her. She is the only agent that she wants you to query. I have sent an exclusive query. The very, very first one I sent was to the top agent that I kind of had in my spreadsheet for my very first book. I sent her an exclusive, but I did put the time constraint on it that it was exclusive for 2 weeks. I have since heard a lot of agents say that they don't like that. It makes them feel a lot of pressure, and that they just assume that you should be querying multiple people at a time anyway. So anyway, if you end up getting multiple full requests, you also need to keep track of all this, because you need to know who has your manuscript so that you can go back to them and say, hey, agent X has offered me representation. You also have my manuscript. I just wanted to update you on that. And then oftentimes they will write back and then say like, oh, I haven't read it yet. Could you give me a week to read it? So you just need to know who has it at any given time, because #professionalism. Okay, so questions, comments, cries of anguish. Let's kind of start going through. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's see what you guys have to say. I do know I am going to go ahead and ask this question. So right here, Agnes asked me in the circle just before the class started, how important is it to have an agent? So great question. You only need an agent if you are traditionally publishing and you want to be published by a press that requires you to have one. So the big five, any of the major presses, most of sort of that middle-sized press, they all require you to have an agent as your go-between. There are some small presses that do not require you to have an agent. You can pitch them the same way that you would pitch an agent themselves. So you do still have to have a finished manuscript. You still have to have a query letter. You still have to have a synopsis. You still have to have all those pieces that you need for querying agents to query a small press. But if you want to be published by Penguin Random House, if you want, Blackstone Publishing, if you want Scholastic, any of those, you have to have an agent in order to get published by them. So I hope that answers Agnes's question. Let me see. I'm going to scroll very back to the beginning of the chat and see if I can find. Okay, here we go. Megan says, do you know if it's possible for a UK citizen to get a US-based literary agent? Yes. When you are publishing for the first time, should you stay within your origin country? I actually don't think that you have to. So my girlfriend Jen is Canadian. And I believe her first literary agent was an American agent, and she did that because the American market is bigger than the Canadian market, and she wanted to be repped in the bigger of the two markets. I know I have looked at some UK agents myself and pitched a few of them. And I know also agents can negotiate foreign rights. And so if you are in the UK, I am like 98% sure you can have an American-based literary agent who then will hit the American market pretty hard, but then they would probably sell the foreign rights to the UK market. That's my guess, but I don't think that you need to worry about that. And as a matter of fact, I would probably say I'd hazard to guess the American market is bigger than the UK market just because it's a bigger population in a bigger country, but I believe that's a yes. I will double check on that for you though. So let's see. Oh, here's a great one. How should you know if you just keep pitching or if your pitch needs to be changed? This is a class in and of itself. Interpreting rejection and what they mean, there is kind of an art to that. I will say that most of what I get back are form rejections. I believe I've heard agents say they might have multiple forms that they copy and paste. Mostly what I get back is very bland and but also supportive, and publishing is subjective, so keep trying. But pretty much if you're not getting a manuscript request, okay, then what they say is after so many, I mean, maybe 30, if you haven't had a manuscript request, you might want to look at your query letter and your first 10 pages because they're not catching an agent's attention. If you are getting manuscript requests, but you're still getting rejections, they read your whole manuscript. They will give you feedback when they reject it, and that will give you an idea of if they just aren't the right fit for your book or if your book needs work. So that's kind of the long and short of it. How do you know if something's form? If something really has no specifics that could be written only about your book, like if the rejection that you get back looks like it could have been copy and pasted to anyone, it's pretty good chance that it's a form. So I did put a form rejection that I just received the other day in the community if you want to take a look, but I can share some of my forms with you as well, and I can share some of my non-forms with you. Sometimes they do get a little sneaky and you think oh, this is really, I think this one was meant just for me. And then you query them with a second book and you get the same one and you're like, wait a minute, it was a form. I've had that happen. So anyway, let's see. What other questions do we have? I know I saw a bunch. Here we go. If I was rejected for not having a platform, but I don't have time to build one and keep writing. So Brittany, you're only going to be rejected for not having a platform if you're writing nonfiction. So I have heard agent after agent after agent say to me that they actually don't expect a fiction writer to have a platform. If you have a social media account and you're kind of active on it, but you're not building followers, that's actually, I've not ever heard an agent say that that's a deal breaker for them. So I would be really, really curious if you're writing nonfiction, because I have heard quite a few nonfiction authors say that they had been rejected for not having a platform. Basically, if they pick you up nonfiction, you can still, I believe, get picked up without having the entire book written, but they want to know that you're going to have an audience to sell it to, since a lot of times that's really niche. So the platform is really, really important for those, but for fiction writers, it's not. And so if you are a fiction writer and you were rejected for not having a platform, I would keep trying, because I don't think that's indicative of what every single agent is looking for. So let's see. And B's pointing out you can have somebody hire you to do a website. Mine is Squarespace, which is like a template. Like you sign up for Squarespace. It's not a whole lot for the year, but you have a template. You don't have to know how to code or do WordPress in order to do it. You can literally just fill out the template and then you can drag pieces around. I believe Wix is the same way. They're pretty easy. But I do know in Query Manager, one of the questions generally is, do you have a website? What is it? They will ask you for your social media. So do you have an X handle? Do you have a Facebook account? Do you have an Instagram? So they'll ask for those things. But like I said a minute ago, I've heard many agents talk and say that that's not a deal breaker for them. So let's see. Keep scrolling. Let's see. Thanks, Jasmine. Without reading my book, you thought, I think I'm pretty perfect for that Brittany Johnson lady too. So I really hope she comes through. Oh, so here's one that I actually don't know the answer to, B. So I have used ReadZ in the past to find a developmental editor for my book. I actually have a really crazy story about that. I have not used ReadZ to look for an agent. I've actually never thought about that. So I cannot speak to the answer to that question. But if you guys go onto ReadZ, which is like a marketplace for authors, you can find everything from developmental editors, copy editors. I think you can find cover designers, book formatters. Like you can find people in the book business on ReadZ. I wouldn't be surprised if agents are on there as well. So that's cool. Let's see. How many authors give up after numerous rejected queries and go the route of self-publishing? Does self-publishing hurt an author? Okay, so I think this is a really tricky question, and there's probably not there's not a definitive answer about this. I do know that people sometimes query first, and if they tell themselves, if I get so many rejections, then I'll self-publish. I can say that I have heard more than one traditionally published author say they had to query 100 agents, or it took me a year. Actually, the agent whose class that I attended earlier this week is a traditionally published author herself. Her first agent, she said it took her 2.5 years with the same manuscript to get an agent. And she is an agent, and it took her 2.5 years to find one. So it is a really long and arduous process. And there are some people who I think give up on it, not because they think they're not good enough. Now, I think that's something that needs to be stated here. Like if you're going to self-publish your book, it still needs to be a really good book. But I think some people just get worn out because it takes so damn long and they get a little impatient. So I think you have to make those rules for yourself. You have to decide, how many queries am I going to send out? When am I going to give up? Like, when is the time? So for me, I can say that part of what went into this decision is the fact that middle grade does not tend to do very well self-published. There's too many gatekeepers. So for me, I'm going to stick with it for probably until I find a way to crack the code and get an agent. I am currently writing a YA book that I do not think that I'm going to traditionally publish. I think we will self-publish that book because YA does better than MG if you go the self-publishing route. And so, but any adult book can do just as well self-published, if not maybe even better, because you're more in control. So I had been under the impression previously that if you self-publish first, it could hurt your chances of being picked up by an agent. And James Wade told us last week in the class that that's not the case anymore, that stigma has sort of gone away. But they will ask you how many copies of a book you've sold. So I have seen that question on Query Manager. If you've self-published, how many copies have you sold? So they're really interested in that because, again, This is a business. They want to know they can sell you. They want to know they're going to make money off of you. They want to know that you can help them make money and they can help you make money. I mean, it's sort of, they sort of go hand in hand. But I can also say this, that I have friends who are hybrid in that they both have traditional and self-publishing contracts. And it's also a business strategy to do both. So my girlfriend Ruth is a romance writer. She started off self-publishing. She self-published a couple of books that actually did really, really well. And she used that to get an agent. And then that agent got her a traditional contract. And so now she puts out 2 romance books a year under her traditional contract, and she puts out 2 that are self-published. And what she does is she uses her traditional contract to help with the marketing and attract new readers. And when those readers come to her and they like her books and they start to binge, she owns half her back catalog and she makes more money that way. So there is a strategy to it too. I mean, if you really want to kind of get into the weeds, you could sort of plan it out that way. So I don't think ultimately, though, in the end, it's really going to hurt you unless you just half-heartedly do it and you don't really sell anything because you don't really try and sell anything. That might hurt you, but it also might not. So, oh, Brittany, you're pitching a memoir. That's why they said you don't have a platform. So that's the really hard piece about a memoir. So memoir falls under nonfiction. So you are expected to have a platform. It just follows a fiction structure without being made up. So, you've kind of, memoirs kind of have to learn all the rules for everything. I do have a friend who was writing this really weird book that was part cookbook and part memoir. It was about is it challah bread in the Jewish culture? And she was a doctor, or she is a doctor, and her name's Beth Riccanati. And she, but was writing this book about how she would go teach these classes, teaching women how to make the bread, and it would bring them together. And it was this whole social thing. And so she wove recipes in with like all the lessons that she had learned about, teaching this like cultural sort of thing, right? And so she pitched that book and was told she didn't have a following. And so she went and she tried to build an Instagram following. And she did really well building the following, but she ultimately ended up hybrid publishing the book with She Writes Press. Because I think even though she built a bigger platform, she might have like kind of missed her mark. I don't know how many followers she ended up getting, but it was kind of interesting. So I'll share that with you. I'll share her book in the community with you if you're interested in seeing what that book is. And I bet she would come talk to us too if I asked her, but that would be why they're looking for a platform. So that makes sense. All right, so Sean wants to know, do agents frequently leave feedback or do they just reject queries? Is it ever appropriate to not ask for feedback on the rejection? Okay, so I will say that most of what you're getting is going to be form. If you get feedback, it's going to be in the form of maybe a line. Okay, so like I've actually had an agent read my entire manuscript and I still just got a line of feedback and then keep going, like keep pitching agents. So I don't know that I've ever had someone say, if you reject me, please don't give me feedback. But for the most part, I think what you're getting, because these agents are just inundated with queries. I actually tried to start pulling it up and I thought, I'm making this class way too long because I was going to show you guys the back end of query tracker to show you how many queries on average these agents are getting every single day. And they're getting, like, I saw one agent had like 96 queries in a day. They don't really have time to give you a lot of feedback. So if you're lucky enough to give feedback, and that is how I'm going to phrase this, if you are lucky enough to give feedback, you want it, because that's going to tell you, is your book ready? Or am I not pitching the right agents? Or is it just something in my query? Like, that's really what you're trying to figure out. But yeah, you actually kind of want it. And it's, to me, it took me a little while to be okay with just getting a form rejection. Like, I felt that was a form of feedback. Like, it wasn't good enough to like get a sentence. And that was, I think that was really tough, but you learn how to interpret it, and it's not that bad. I promise you guys, it's not that bad. Oh, that one's not a question, but okay. The experience that you've had with Readsy. Yeah, some good, some bad, just like any website, that's for sure. So what's the difference between YA and MG? Mine, I think, is both. It can't be both. So it can't be both. The easiest way to separate MG and YA is MG is up to like 12, 13. YA is like once you get to high school, that's like the start of YA. And so like 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Once the character is out of high school, you are no longer YA. So that's like the easiest way to determine is like the age of your main character. But there are other ways to sort of determine as well. So like in MG, like the biggest way I can kind of describe it is like there's always a return to home for a sense of belonging. And for YA, it's always like going out into the world to find your sense of belonging. But age of the main character, just to give you the quickest answer, that's sort of the way to determine it. So let's see. Brittany says she once asked for more feedback and got it. You were brave to ask. I've not been brave enough to ask because they're so busy. So let's see. Jasmine says she's trying to decide between traditional and self-publishing. Do traditional publishers really help with marketing your book? Or as a new author, are you still stuck trying to self-promote? Okay, so there is a trend that is happening where even traditionally published authors are still expected to market their book. So you may be given a publicist, depending on who buys your book and what their budget is. Like I've heard Disney Hyperion has pretty deep pockets, and I have a friend who was published by them, and they sent her on a book tour and they put her up in really nice hotels, and she got to make all the rounds, and she was like, it was kind of like a dream come true. But then I have other friends who are like, I had to hire the publicist out of my own pocket. And so really I think that depends on who picks you up, and what their budget is and what your budget is. So you are expected in some way, shape, or form, either through your own time or through your own money, to market your book. So yeah. So let's see. How many drafts should you do before querying? That's also a great question, because it probably depends on your book, and it probably just depends on your skill level, depends on what kind of shape it is. So I've heard it put a couple of different ways, and it's one of those things that I think until you just feel it, like you don't really know. My girlfriend, KJ Del Antonia, told me when I started querying my first book, she said, it has to be good enough to go out into the world, but not so good that you can't change it. All right. And what she means by that is, has to be good enough to attract an agent, to show them that you have skill, that you have the chops, that you can write a book, but not so good that if that agent says to you, hey, listen, before I send this out to the publishers, I'm really going to need you to do X to change your book. Would you consider doing that? So it's kind of along the lines of that R&R that I talked about at the beginning, because the truth is, you're going to write a book, and you're going to write the best book that you possibly can, and you're going to send it to an agent, and an agent may suggest changes before they send it out to the publishing house's editors, right? And once it gets bought by the publishing houses, those editors are then going to have their voices in their head, and they're going to tell you what changes they want you to make to it. So When you're querying, that's not the be all end all. This book is now in its final form and it's never going to change. You're going to have editors along the way that are then going to tell you this, I want you to do this or that or this or that. Okay. And James Wade sort of talked about that, how he had an editor at the publishing house that helped him do the same thing. Right. So James put it, and I kind of like the way James puts it because, there's math to it, and math seems a little harder and faster to me. So James said it's got to be like 90% finished. All right. So what the agent might ask you to change may or may not be that big a deal. But it's got to be like 90% finished. So like if you make some mistake in chapter 3, or you don't have enough world building there, or you don't, have this or that, like, maybe it's not a big deal, but like the bones have to be really solid. And I'd say the first 50 pages at least have to be really polished, because those are going to be the pages that are going to be used to attract the agents to ask you for your fall. So, Johnson mistyped. Is it ever inappropriate to ask for feedback after a rejection? Okay, good. That question actually makes a little bit more sense now. I would say yes, if you've just gotten a form rejection, because that is not an open conversation. That is a no, see you later. If they give you feedback on your full manuscript or a partial manuscript, first of all, they're going to be giving you some sort of feedback. That might be an open conversation to maybe ask 1 or 2 questions. But I don't know that I would expect too much from an agent. I think you're really lucky to get anything, and that's just kind of the reality of it. But like I said, I think if they had your manuscript full or even a partial and they said no, and they came back and you kind of wanted to know a little bit more, if you politely word a question, the worst they can do is say no or ignore your email. So, all right, let's see. All right, so I think we have gone through all of the questions. I want to thank you guys for joining me. If you think of anything after we end the live stream and you want to ask me a question, just head over to the Storycraft Cafe and make a post and tag me in it. And I'm happy to keep this conversation going. Also, if there's anything else that you would like to see us talk about, let me know, because next week we're going to be doing a live edit of query letters. So Alyssa Hewitt's going to help me, and she's great. She and I are going to get in together. We've got, I think, like 6 different query letters that we're going to kind of dissect and talk about. So come join us for that. And then the week after that, so the second week in March, we're going to do a class on pitching small presses, which are those traditional presses that you do not need an agent to pitch. So we're gonna dig into that a little bit. But if you guys want to see anything about rejections, or if you want to see anything about Query Tracker and like how you can use that to sort of like look at a slush pile or anything, just let me know. But otherwise, thank you guys all for coming today, and I will see you in the Storycraft Cafe. Thanks, everybody.